Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, StayNTouch Cloud PMS Configuration and User Training Series, Revenue Management and Add-on Configuration, presented by StayNTouch Implementation Consultant, Galen Coles. I'm your host, Erin Fisher, the content writer here at StayNTouch. Today's presentation will explain how to set up revenue management and add-ons in StayNTouch Cloud PMS. In this webinar, we will cover the following topics: rate types, including contract rates, rate codes, rate sequences, rules and restrictions, channel managers, demographics, and add-on configuration. We will have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will answer them in the order they are received at the end. And that's all I have right now. Galen, I'm going to hand the presentation over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm excited to talk about rates and setup for your revenue management. So we're going to go ahead and start off today going into the back end of our system. So within our menu, we're going to jump into settings and settings again. And before we actually get to the point where we're going to build out our rate code, we're going to do a few steps ahead of that. So we'll look at rate types, rules and restrictions, as well as demographics and add-ons, and then we'll finalize everything with rate building. So if we jump over into reservations, we're going to be able to set up our demographics. And there's a few different areas that you can utilize depending on what you're going to need for your property and how you like to see things spliced out. So the first section here is going to be markets. Now this does qualify as market segmentation codes. I know we've got a different segments here, but this is what we'll be using to segment out our markets. So when we go in here, you'll see that I've already got one existing. However, we can go ahead and add additional, and really it's just creating a label. So we can go ahead and say that maybe we're creating a retail bar market, and then perhaps we had other markets such as, you know, corporate business, negotiated rather, and so on. So you can of course have as many of these as you need, and you can break them out as, you know, specific to your market. Once those are complete, you can do the same process within sources and origin of booking. Depending on, you know, your integrations with your CRS, as well as how, again, you'd like to see things spliced out, you may or may not necessarily use all of these demographic resources, but they are available to you should you need them. So just like with markets, you'll go ahead and add in your other sources, things like Expedia, Hotel Tonight, those various outlets where you are pulling in reservations from. And then lastly, you've got origin of booking, which again is another layer that allows you to add further coding. So this may be something like phone or reservation desk, for instance. So again, we can enter that, save changes, and now you'll have this label available to use when we go and build our rates later on. So moving on from demographics, and the reason that we go ahead and set these up first is because when you're building your rate codes, then you'll have all those codes available to go ahead and apply within that rate code. From demographics, we can go over to rules and restrictions, which is actually going to be under rates, under rules and restrictions here. This is where, well, first off, we can go ahead and toggle on certain restrictions that are later usable in our rate manager. So in your yielding tool within the PMS, if you toggle these particular restrictions on, you'll be able to apply them to your rate calendar when you're doing all of your yielding. Now, if we scroll down, you're also able to see cancellation rules as well as deposit requests. So if we toggle these on, it just allows for you to have cancellation policies or penalties as well as deposit requests. So you'll see we've already got one listed here under cancellation policy, but you can in fact add as many policies within cancellation and deposit as you may need. They'll sit here unused until you've actually applied them to a rate code. And you can apply these rate code by rate code. So once again, that's why we're going to go ahead and create these first so that when we get to the point where we are building our rate, we have them ready to be used. So let's take a look at this cancellation rule. You're able to provide it with a name and a description. This description is something that will show up on guest-facing confirmation letters and so forth. So it is nice to go ahead and flesh out that text so that both your front desk as well as your guests can read through that policy and understand all the parameters of it. Now you have a couple of different opportunities to set up how this should be charged, how this policy should charge the penalty. The amount here will be what you're charging, but dependent on the amount type, this amount might be something else. So 100 in this sense is 100% of the first night that we would be charging within that 24-hour period. However, you do have the ability to supply it with just an amount. So it may be just that you have a flat $100 fee. You can also provide a number of nights. So if you wanted to charge, let's say 2 nights instead of 1, you can go ahead and list that. Now in this case, we are going to go ahead and stick with a first night option. Now within this, you also have the ability to do 100% or a percentage or an amount of the nightly cost as well. In this case, we're going to stick with a fairly standard policy of 100% of the first night. You'll then select your number of days in advance that this should kick in. So of course, this is a 24-hour policy, so we'll put 1 day. However, if it were 48, we'd put 2, 72, 3, and so forth. You'll go ahead and select the time, or essentially your arrival time. So we are saying 100% of the first night, 1 day in advance of check-in of 4 p.m. You're checking in at 3, of course, you go ahead and put that, whatever time you'd like that to begin on the day of arrival. The last thing that you'll select is going to be a charge code that this should post as in the event that somebody does incur a cancellation penalty. So you'll be able to select from a drop-down, you can select your room charge or your cancellation fee charge code if you have one specific, and that will be what it'll post as moving forward. Now you do see this apply to all bookings toggle. This is useful in the event that you truly only have one policy on property, or maybe you've got a period where you want to wipe out any of the other policies taking place. This is going to override, by selecting this, any other policies applied within your rate code. So just be sure that you are, in fact, wanting only this one policy to be in place over the period when you have this toggled on. Now, once that's saved, you'll be able to, of course, come back to it when we're building our rates. Now, looking at deposit requests, this is going to be very much the same in that you provide it with a label. So let's say non-refundable. Oops. There we go. We'll go ahead and, of course, put in that description, and if you'll want to flesh this out as well, it does show up for your front desk agents making reservations and reservationists, as well as that can show up on confirmations confirming that deposit policies have been met and so forth. Now down from here, you'll want to allow editing of deposit payments. This will allow you to later on, refund partials or split that payment. So you'll always want to go ahead and select that just to allow for your changing of that deposit in the future if you need to. Again, you have that apply to all bookings if this is truly going to be effective across the board of all your rates. However, you can again apply deposit requests on each individual rate code. So this isn't something that you may need to utilize all that often. If by chance you have reservations that have routing that you would rather not have the deposit applied to because of having multiple cards on the booking potentially, whatever the case is, you can go ahead and select this. And then for those reservations that have routing that may be utilizing this policy, it would not kick in for them. Now down here, you're going to see that this looks much the same as the cancellation did. You do have the ability here, though, to schedule deposit rules. So you could essentially have, let's say, 100% of that first night posted at time of booking. And you've got a couple of options here for scheduling at time of booking, day of arrival, and then a custom filter. So if we do at time of booking, we could then add a secondary schedule. Let's say that we want the first night to be collected at time of booking, but we want the balance of it to be collected. And I'm going to say nightly. Know that 100% of the nightly cost will be taking into account that 100% of the first night was already charged. So you're not going to double charge. But at this point, you could say, let's say 10 days out, we're collecting the balance. What you're able to do now is allow for the system to acquire this amount on the day of the booking, and then 10 days out automatically reach out for the rest of the balance of the stay. You can, in fact, add multiple schedules here. So this can be really fun if you have more dynamic rates going on. So once that's saved again, you'd see it here in your deposit request and be able to use it later on. So if we jump over now into rates, actually let's take a look at add-ons first. Add-ons are going to be our package elements as well as our enhancements. They work in essentially twofold. They can provide two functions. So one, of course, is that enhancement functionality, which is that you can provide your guests, regardless of the rate they booked, the opportunity to opt in to various incremental revenue opportunities, such as parking, or maybe you offer champagne in the room. If you have any kind of rentals like bikes or scooters and things like that. Those are all things that you could create an add-on for that would later be able to be applied to various reservations that guests opted into those. You can then also use add-ons as true package elements where they are built into a rate code, just so that your accounting team can splice out the revenue streams accurately. So in order to build an add-on, we'll come here and give it a name. So let's say that this is champagne. Again, you'll want to go ahead and put in a description, either depending on what the item is. Champagne is pretty straightforward, but if this were a package inclusive of several items, then you could put the description here listing out all those inclusions. And down from that, you do have the ability to place an image here, whether it's an image of the actual item or just sort of an indicator of what you're getting. That image can show up on your guest mobility check-in flow as well as your guest kiosk flow. Now, to the right of that, much like our deposit and cancellation policies, we're going to flesh out exactly when this should be available as well as how it should be charged and so forth. So you do have the ability to select a date range here. If this is something that you always offer, then you don't necessarily have to put a date range in here. However, if this is, say, champagne that's available only over the week of Valentine's, then I would go ahead and enter that Valentine's week. Okay. Now it's only going to show up as being offerable over this period. Now down from there, we'd go ahead and select how we'd like this to be coded from a charge code or transaction code perspective. So in this case, we'll say that champagne falls into F&B, and then looks like I don't have a charge code there, but let's go ahead and just use our imaginations in that sense. So we'll say that this is going into F&B, and then we're having it post as some sort of an F&B package charge code, or F&B, liquor and wine, that sort of thing. Down from there, you have the ability to put in an amount that this should be charged. Remember that when you're setting this up, if you're setting this up for an enhancement where you are charging the guest directly, then your pricing may be a little bit different than if this was a package element where the guest is not seeing the pricing, but it is being built into the rate code. So in the event that we were charging this towards a guest, maybe we have a more marked up cost of $30. You'll select your currency. You'll then select here the calculation rate. So essentially, am I charging $30 per adult, per child? Is it a flat fee of $30? Is this per person? And so on. In this case, it's a one-time flat fee of $30 for a bottle of champagne, so we don't need it to calculate up based on the number of occupants. And the posting type, you'll have a number of options here. So you can go ahead and set up a custom posting schedule. This could be once every week of a stay, only on the first night, and so on. In this case, we're going to go ahead and say first night because it is a flat fee, and the guest has opted into it from the get-go, meaning that they've booked it with their reservation. We can go ahead and just consume this $30 right on the first night. Now down from there, you've got some opportunities to further restrict exactly how this posts. Essentially, you can toggle this on so that while you could apply the add-on to a reservation, it would still require you to manually post it when it's being consumed. You then have the consume next day, which is honestly one that I find most people will utilize. This is really handy for things like breakfast coupons and so forth, where the guest may not be able to utilize the additional or the add-on or the package element on that first night of their stay. So rather than collecting this amount, let's say this was breakfast coupons and it was $30 a day, Well, I wouldn't necessarily want to consume that $30 out of the room rate for that first night because they couldn't use the breakfast coupon, right? So this will allow you to tag that on to the next day. Now down from there, we have the ability to inventory. So essentially, if you were, let's say, using bike rentals here, then you could say we only have 5 bikes. Now where that comes into play is within your availability calendar on the front end of the application. You'll be able to see when something is booked, when it is available on a calendar view, so that you can accurately speak to whether a guest has the ability to opt into a bike rental or not, based on what's actually available. Now down from there, this is where you're basically going to tack on where this is being applied. So bestseller will tag this in your enhanced stay page. So when you're within the booking flow making a reservation, if you've not notated this as a bestseller, it'll show up first as an option to provide to your guests. However, if you were making this a package element, you would be able to select rate only. Then this would not show up in your enhanced stay list, but would only be available to utilize when building rate codes in true package sense. Now, the last thing that you're able to do down here is exclude this from the rate. So in the event that, let's say, this is champagne, and here you have, let's say, a rate that comes with champagne already. Well, in that case, we may want to exclude this rate, meaning that when you're booking this rate and you get to the enhanced stay page, this champagne offering would not be available. That way you alleviate the potential for double booking and enhancement that's already included in the rate code. Now, once you save those changes, you'll be able to see this add-on show up either in your enhancements or in your, in your package elements when you're building your rate code to apply to an actual rate. So now let's go ahead and jump into the building of that rate. We've got one last step before we can just go ahead and do that, and that's going to be rate types. Now, rate types are a mechanism that allow you both to fence your rates from your internal people. So you can hide certain rates from showing up immediately to your front desk without some sort of a qualifier or promotion code. And then they also allow you to more efficiently yield your rates on a group type level when you're doing that in your rate manager. So when we add a new one, you'll of course give it a name, and many times your rate types will match up, I find, with your market segments. Because you are yielding those segments together typically, you would see these align with those a lot of the time. So you'll see we've got retail, OTA, group, we may have something like corporate negotiated. In addition to giving this a name, you'll provide a rate classification. Now, this is the fencing mechanism. Essentially, if you use public against this rate type, any rates that you designate as being in this type would be publicly viewable or immediately visible to your front desk. So when they go to look up rates, any rates in this type would be available for them to look at and book for everybody. You then have group, which is of course going to designate the rates you've placed in this type as being usable with group bookings only. So you'll be able to see those in a list when you go to build a group, and you can apply those rate codes to each of your blocks if you need it, but would otherwise hide it from your general public list of rates that your front desk can see. The last one is going to be corporate, and that doesn't necessarily mean that only corporate negotiated rates are corporate. Essentially, this is going to be that fencing mechanism again, where anything marked as corporate would be usable in a transient sense when booking, but would not immediately show up in your overall rate list. When marking something as corporate, you'll need to go ahead and apply something like a contracted rate in order to be able to access it when you need to. And we'll look at that in just a bit. So now that we've got our rate types built, we can go along and build our actual rate. So I'm going to jump into best available rate here. There we go. So you'll initially start with the details up top. We'll go ahead and enter a name and a rate code. It's important that this rate code matches identically with how you're building this rate in your CRS or your central reservation system. In order to link these two rates, this needs to match exactly. Capitalization, spacing, punctuation, all of it. Now to the right, you'll then flesh out this description, and of course you'd want to list out all the inclusions, details, and so forth, because this is going to be shown to your front desk during the booking process. So if you've got a lot of language here, letting them know what the parameters of this rate are, they'll be able to speak accurately to that with your guests. Now down from here, you're going to be able to select your rate type, essentially classifying this within your list of types that you want, as well as potentially fencing it. Down from there, you have the ability to enter a charge code. So this is room charge at this point. You'd be able to select from a list of charge codes that are available to you based on what you had built. Depending on how you want this rate to post each evening, you're able to select that charge code here. You'll select your currency. And then down from here, you've got a couple of different options. You've got another fencing mechanism. Essentially, these will block the rate from being bookable either in your PMS or in your CRS, depending on what you toggle in. For instance, if you were to toggle on channel only and save this, then this rate would not be bookable in your PMS by any of your team members. Conversely, if you were to go ahead and select PMS only, this would only be bookable in your PMS and would not be sent out to your CRS. Of course, public just indicates that you are able to use this rate in either case. Now here, you've got this extra adult child minimum amount threshold. I typically recommend putting in 100% here. It just helps when you're yielding your rates in your rate manager to not accidentally overinflate your additional person fee. This is essentially saying that whatever you've set the additional person fee to be is the max that it should be. Now down from there, we've got the ability to base and copy. So based on is one that you'll utilize most often, I believe. And this is where you create a derived relationship between rates. So if you're basing another rate, let's say that instead of bar, we're actually building AAA, what you'd be able to do is select from the dropdown here a list of other rates that you're essentially creating or linking as a parent rate. From there, once you've selected the rate, you can go up or down in an amount, so either $1 or %. And when you then save this rate, it will copy over all of the seasonality and everything from the parent that you'd selected. However, it will make it 10% off of that parent all the time. So essentially, you could link this AAA rate to best available at a 10% discount, which would essentially mean that anytime you needed to change that AAA rate, you would have to change the best available rate because they are linked in that parent-child relationship. Copied from is going to be different in that it allows you to emulate another rate, but have it be its own parent rate. So essentially, if you copied something from bar, you would have a new sort of bar rate that you could yield on its own, but you could, of course, label it whatever you needed it to be. You can copy from and apply a discount. So if you wanted to copy over from a rate, so you were saving yourself a bit of time, but you needed that rate to be 10% less than what you were copying from, you also have that functionality. Now, moving down from here, this is where we're going to apply all of those other things that we set up. So our rules and restrictions, our demographics, any add-ons or package elements, this is all where that's going to be keyed in. So under additional details, you have an end date, which is a hard stop sale date. So depending on when you have this available, you could say that this rate should not be bookable after the 9th. Now down from there, you can hard code things like your market, source, origin of booking, depending on what this rate is. Market is something I would say, will always be able to hard code because your rate codes will always be of a particular market segment. However, source and origin, depending on the rate, may be left blank or may be filled in. For instance, with best available rate in this case, I may leave the source and origin blank because those things can change due to the fact that best available rate can be booked across multiple outlets. However, if this were, say, an Expedia rate, I would be able to go ahead and fill these all in, each to be hard-coded, because an Expedia rate is always coming from the same source, always coming from the same origin. Know that your central reservation system or your CRS will fill these codes in depending on what you have mapped, should it be booked through the CRS. Now to the right here, you've got a couple of additional options that allow you to suppress the rate in the event that this is perhaps an OTA net rate where you don't want the guests to see that. When suppressing a rate, you are able to provide the option to your front desk to still be able to see the suppressed rate when they need to, but otherwise this would prevent it from printing out on folios or perhaps being sent in an email out to your guest in a confirmation or anything like that. Down here, you can apply a commission to this rate. So let's say that this is an American Express travel rate and they have an 18% commission with you. You can go ahead and place that here, either $1 or percent, depending on your commission model. You'd then be able to select those charge codes, whether it's room charge, taxes, any other inclusions in this rate, essentially saying which of those charge transactions is actually commissionable. Now down from there, we've got the ability to assign certain tasks for housekeeping to this rate code. So if this were, let's say, a green initiative package or a turn down package, then I could go ahead and specifically tag a type of clean or type of work to this rate so that when this rate's booked, it would trigger that particular type of work to your housekeeping department and assigning. Now down from there, we do have an activity log here so that you can see all of the edits and changes being made in this rate. So if anything ever changes or maybe this rate gets deactivated, you'd be able to see who took that action and kind of ask an accountability sense as to why they maybe did that. Down from there, you've got rules and restrictions. This is where you can hard code some of your min-max length of stay, advanced booking sort of codings. Know that these do sometimes have limitations depending on the CRS or the central reservation system. So just let us know if you've got any questions there. To the right here, you can, of course, then select those deposit requirements or deposit requests against, as well as your cancellation policies. So if you had multiples here, you'd be able to select from a list of each of those, applying the one that is particular to this booking. Lastly, you've got the package elements. So you'll see that we now have that package element. We have the ability to toggle this on. When an add-on is used against a rate code, it will always automatically be applied to a booking that is booked using this rate code. You are not able to remove an add-on that has been booked in May because it is built into the rate. So in order to, after the fact, remove this, you'd actually have to post an adjustment. So just keep that in mind. But obviously, most times if you've got this linked in with your rate code, it's because it is built in and they are opting into that package. Now in this area, you are able to kind of set how this is showing up to guest. So in add to price, this will show up as an addition to the room rate. Whereas include in price would allow this $25 to be within the room rate so that your guest sees one line item on their folio. However, from an accounting standpoint, you are breaking out room revenue versus $25 of parking revenue. Now, once we've saved that, we can go ahead and move on to selecting our room types. This is where you're going to go ahead and just apply all of those room types that are available for this rate to book into. If, say, this were a suite only rate, then I'd go ahead and leave all of my standard rooms as unselected and only select my suite room types. In this case, it is the best available rate, however, so I'm going to give all the rooms to it. So I can go ahead and save, and now we'll move on to building our series, or pardon me, our sets. So what you're doing here is establishing when the rate exists. Obviously, you're going to be able to do a lot of your day-to-day yielding, making sure that that particular holiday weekend is $50 higher, and that weekend has a 2-night minimum. That'll be done on the front end. Essentially, what you're doing here is creating a default or a fallback rate, as well as you're setting the default differentials between your room types. So essentially, if this is 200 and this is 250, when you go into your rate manager, it's going to try and maintain that $50 differential between these two room types. So you do have the ability to name these sets if you maybe wanted to name them after the seasons or quarters or however you like to break out your rates. Just remember that these dates are just so that the rate exists over that time, as well as if these rates, if your yielding on the front end were to get removed somehow, this is the rate that would display instead as that default rate. So I do recommend you do put actual rates here that would be bookable, but perhaps are slightly protective so that in the event that these are the rates that appear, you aren't necessarily selling your rooms for $100. Maybe you would have rates closer to the higher end of your rate spectrum. Now, once you've filled these in, it is important that you fill in all of the fields so that the system can recognize that you in fact don't charge anything or do have a fee and so forth. Once you've updated that, you'd be able to complete either a new date range or a new set within that same date range if you were doing day of week pricing, for instance. But once this is saved, your rate is complete. The rate is now available for the month of May. So when we jump back out of our rates, you'd be able to see whether this was derived. So if this, in that AAA example, if this were based on bar, you'd see based on best available rate here, the rate type and the sequence if you're adding it. We'll look at how to create one in just a moment, as well as the date ranges or the number of seasons that you have built into this rate. So let's talk about sequence really quick. It is the ability essentially to customize the ordering of your rates as they appear in various portals within the tool. So when going into rate sequence, you've got some defaults here. You can look at things once that's saved, you'd then be able to have multiples and you can any of the sequence that is first is the one that is currently active. So if we go into manage rates, you'll now see that sequence and any others that you had, and you'll be able to specifically drag and drop into the sequence so that they appear in that specific order. So now when your front desk goes to look at rates for the summer season, they're going to always see the group flex rate first, then the best available rate, and then so on. It's important to remember that if you're using a rate sequence and there are rates that you leave out of the sequence, those rates would not be bookable over that period. All right. Now, once you've created that custom sequence, you can, of course, select custom sequence as the option that you could see the order of those rates in any of the other areas. All right, so let's jump over into channel managers, which will be the last item in this list for today. So within rates, the last step that we'll do in order to make sure that your rate is being sent out to the world via your CRS or your central reservation system is to come into channel managers and map this rate. So whenever you're needing to map a rate, you'll go into channel managers, you'll see the list of all of our CRS partners here. You can then select the one that is active or the one that you utilize. So let's say that you work with Sabre Synexus. When we're ready to map a rate, we'll click Add New. You'll begin typing in the name of the rate that you'd like to map. It will populate here and you'll be able to select it. Once you do, you'll be able to then see the room types that you're able to offer to the CRS. So essentially, even though you're offering all of those room types to the rate code itself, like we did in our rate code setup, you could actually distinguish which of those room types you're allowing the CRS to book as well. So if we only wanted the CRS to be able to book these rooms because maybe these ones we like to keep a tight control of on property, then this rate would be updated only along these 3 room type paths to your CRS. However, most times we're going to give it to everything and hit save. That rate is now mapped. Now, you can't always come back as well and deactivate something or delete it if it shouldn't be going out to your CRS any longer. But this is the last step in making sure that you get your rates built and then connected out to your central system so they can be distributed to your OTAs and your website and so forth. All right, well, that does bring us, the last thing actually I mentioned was contracted rates, apologies. So let's take a look at how you create those contracted rates so that you can access rates that you've fenced from being viewable on your general list of rates. That we'll actually do in the front end of the system here. In order to do that, we'll jump into revenue management and company and TA cards. We're going to bring up one of our company and TA cards that we have created. So let's just go ahead and use this Airbnb card. Now, creating a company card or a travel agency card is quite simple. You'll go into this area and click Add New, select whether you're doing a company or a travel agency card. The only difference being that company cards have this corporate ID field, whereas travel agencies will have an IATA number field. Now, beyond creating your card, we're actually going to jump into contracts. This is where you go to link a rate to a company card or travel agency card. Now, when we hit create new contract, what we're able to do is establish an access code first. So this is essentially the quote unquote promo code that allows you to access the rate that you're linking here later on when you need to. So for instance, a Hotel Tonight or an Airbnb, Expedia, any of your corporate negotiated rates where you don't necessarily want your front desk to have access to that rate in their general list, you'd come here to create an access code so that when they use this access code, they see that rate only. So let's go ahead and call this our Airbnb access code. If this is something internal where you're never going to give this access code to your guests to book into this rate, then you of course can make this pretty simple. But if this were, say, let's like a corporate group with, pardon me, not a group, but a corporate negotiated rate, you may create an access code that is of a certain type that you would be able to hand to your contacts at that particular company to utilize on your website to book. So there is some setup that's necessary within your CRS as well to accomplish that, but this is what that would also allow for. So we'll go ahead and create a range that this access code is available to book into that rate. You have the ability to set a contracted number of nights so that if you'd like to reference how many rooms they've picked up versus what your expectation of them producing into your property is, you can go ahead and label that here. So if you were expecting them to pick up 20 nights per month, then you can put that in. You'd be able to see that comparatively in reporting. You don't have to fill that in, however, if you don't need or want to, so you can leave that blank. The last option is to include a contract owner or essentially a sales manager who is responsible for this account. You can tag them against this so that people understand who to go to ask questions about this particular contract. Now, once we have this all fleshed out, you can go ahead and hit Save Contract. You'll see that it's all saved now. You have it in your current contracts. And the last thing that you'll be able to utilize is the contracted rate. So this is where now we will begin typing in the rate code that we're allocating to this particular company. You can, in fact, do multiple rate codes. So if you had, let's say, a dynamic and a fixed priced rate, you could offer both of them against this contract so that when somebody utilizes that access code on your website or at the front desk, they're able to see either rate depending on what's available. So if you've closed out that fixed rate or that static rate and only left open the dynamic rate because it's a holiday busy period or something, then you'd be able to go ahead and put in those multiple rates and see which one is available. So once we save that, I can now go into my booking flow, utilize this access code to see those rates that are applicable to this entity outside of the general list of rates that I have available to my front desk. All right, with that, that does bring us to the end of today's session, so I will pass it back to Erin.
All right, thank you, Galen, for that insightful presentation. I'd now like to take to the floor to answer some questions. Remember, you can submit questions through the question box in the middle of the control panel. So our first question is, will the webinar be archived for team members that are not able to join? And yes, that will be. We'll be hosting it on our knowledge base. There's a section there specifically for the Stay in Touch Cloud PMS webinar series, so you can find that there. And we'll also be posting a banner on the PMS. And our next question is from Kasia. What does the parking toggle do?
Oh, in our add-ons, I believe is what you're referencing. And that parking toggle is going to be specific to your guest mobility and guest kiosks. So when you toggle that on, you're essentially noting it as or tagging it with a parking module. So it'll just show up as a inclusive of that parking.
Okay.
Specific to the guest mobility and the guest kiosk. So you toggle that on for parking specific to those flows.
Okay. And then the next question is from Georgios. If an add-on is used to be sold as a package and as a single item, do you need to duplicate the same add-on? And then why are we not able to have the same add-on as a package item and as an add-on that can be added to any rate?
So you can have it be the same. The only reason that you would need to potentially duplicate the add-on is if you had different pricing depending on how it was being used. So if you have an enhancement add-on, you may have a marked up price that you're offering directly to the guests because they're going to pay for that. Or from a package sense, you may need to have a secondary add-on specific to packages if you're, say, charging the wholesale cost of an item in that package element. So for instance, with that champagne example, or we'll just pretend, but with that champagne example, the champagne may cost $25 if we're charging it directly to the guest. However, if it costs $10 to actually buy it, and that's what we're using in the package element, then you'd want to have two separate ones because you can only have one price here. I hope that helps to clarify.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And then the next question is from Ryan. When building a rate and a rate code, what is the best way for that to carry over to a booking engine such as Synexus?
I'm not sure I understand completely the question, but essentially once you build the rate, and if this rate code matches exactly, all you have to do is enter this in channel managers, and that will sync up with what's in your CRS. Now, I should qualify this in saying that you do have to build the rate initially in both places, meaning that you'd have to build your best available rate in your CRS like Synexus and build it in the PMS. But once you've built them both there and entered it in channel managers, that's it. It's then linked. So depending on when you're talking about going, either if it's a new CRS or if you already have an existing CRS, there might be some differences there. Typically with a new CRS, will assist you in getting that uploaded and onboarded initially. But after you've gone live, you'll be able to come into channel managers anytime you need to add additional mapped rates, as long as you've built them on both systems ahead of time.
Gotcha. All right. And then another question from Ryan. When building a rate code and using the copy from function, if the base rate is adjusted, like bar increasing, does the new rate adjust in flux as it would when you use the based on function, or is it static from the time a new rate is built?
It would be static from the time that the new rate is built. So it is admittedly not a function that you'll use all the time, like you would with a based on, but it can be really nice if, let's say, you want to have something built and copy all of those seasons. Let's say you've got like 20 different seasons built into your system. If you copy that rate over, it's going to copy all of those seasons and everything over, so that it just saves you a bit of time in having to just create a new rate from scratch. However, it would be independent from that initial parent rate. So that's the copied from function. It will bring everything over, similar to a derived, but it will then leave it isolated away from it, so it can be yielded on its own.
All right. And then another one from Ryan. So could you clarify based on versus edit rate? Regardless of what happens to the based on rate, the edit rate would be the default. I'm not sure I understand the question, but I think he wants you to clarify.
Sure. So essentially, when you create a based on relationship, that means that the child rate cannot be changed. The rate amount cannot be changed on its own. Essentially, you have to change the parent in order to change the child rate. So if bar and AAA are derived off of one another, then you would have to, raise bar by $10 in order to make AAA a higher rate. Now you can still go ahead and apply restrictions independently of each other, meaning that you could close out or put a minimum stay on AAA separate from bar. But when it comes to rate amounts, you would have to change the parent in order for the child to change. Now that's based on. Copied from is completely separate. The rates emulate each other but are not linked in any way. So you'd have to yield both of those rates individually in order to have those change. I hope that helps to further clarify.
Yeah, and let us know if you need further clarification on that. And then Kasha asks, for add-ons, does it include price in the deduct? Does it include in price deduction the add-on price from the room rate?
So when you're creating an add-on and you link it to a rate code, you would be able to, if I understand correctly, you would be able to essentially designate whether this is included in the room rate or not. So if you add to price, then it isn't included in the room rate. It's an additional $25 on top of the room rate. Whereas if you include in price, and let's say the room rate is $50, then $25 of that 50 is going to go towards parking and the other 25 towards room rate.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is from Karen. How do you link a card to a contract?
I think that maybe is a little confusing with the language there. So you don't link a company card with a contract. The contract tab is in a company card. So when you create a company card, so if we go back to our Airbnb, this contract, pardon me. Sorry about that. This contract tab is already there. So if we go in here, you'll see contracts is already there. So you just hit create new contract, and then this is where you're going to link that rate code. So once this is all linked, anytime you use this access code, say when you're making a reservation, so I'll now be able to see it here. When I go to find rooms and rates, it's only going to show me on the recommended tab those two rates that I had assigned to that contract, as opposed to my general list of rates over here, which would be available to anybody.
Okay, thank you. And then how would you suggest applying discounts on a rate plan by room type? For example, AAA 18% STD room, or standard room, and deluxe room minus 20%.
Unfortunately, there wouldn't be a way to do that within the derived method, because the derived method only allows you to discount it by one type, by one amount against whatever the parent rate is. What you could do is you could create multiple rate types. So you could have AAA, one per room type. That would be kind of a workaround, although that means that you would have quite a number of let's say AAA rates, but that would be a workaround. But otherwise, there is not a way to easily derive different percentages by room type.
Okay, thank you. And then Giorgio says, so you cannot create an add-on that will be included or added to a rate. You need to create a duplicate of the same add-on.
No, so that you definitely can create one add-on that can be used both as an enhancement and as a package element. You just need to be cognizant that the rate for that you can't have two separate rates in the same add-on. So if you need that price to be different depending on how it's being used, then you need more than one. But if the price is always going to be $30 for whatever that item is, then you can create one. use it as an enhancement for $30, or use it as a package element for $30. It can be used as both, or you can create multiples.
Okay. And then Georgia's also asked, when will you speak about promotions, discounts to a rate? So that would be more finance, would you say, Galen?
Yeah, we could definitely loop that into a finance call for sure.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be covering that then in our finance session, which will be next week. And the next question is from Daniel. How would you apply a service recovery rate?
Service recovery rate. I'm not sure I understand what exactly that is. If you mean to just apply like a service recovery, like you posted $100 in room and tax, but you need to give 20 of it back because maybe there was an issue with the room, that would be posting an adjustment. That wouldn't take place within rates or add-ons, really.
Okay, and yeah, Daniel's saying yes to that. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions right now, so I'll give everyone a few more seconds to enter those. All right, if there are no more questions, I'd like to offer some final thoughts. So let me switch back. Okay, so in this webinar, we covered rate types, including contract rates, rate codes, rate sequences, rules and restrictions, channel managers, demographics, and add-on configuration. Oh, excuse me. All right, and with that, I'd like to conclude our presentation. Thank you all for coming, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to email me at erin.fisher@StayNTouch.com. Thanks again.